Welcome to the We Are for Good podcast. It is such a delight to have a New Yorker in the house today who we have just found out has Oklahoma roots, which you don't find that very often, John.
Not at all.
And we are so delighted to welcome Yolanda F. Johnson. And it would take me the full half hour to read her resume. It is so impressive. She is a Renaissance woman, not only in the development world, but also in the performance world. And she's going to talk to us about so many different topics today. It's hard to know where to start, but welcome, Yolanda. We are so delighted that you are here.
Well, I am thrilled to be here. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. I'm going to read just a little bit of highlights from your bio, but Yolanda is the principal and founder of YFJ Consulting LLC, but she is also the founder of WOC, which is Women of Color in Fundraising and Philanthropy. Sorry, mouthful for me. And she's also president of Women in Development New York, which is the New York City area's premier professional organization for women in fundraising and philanthropy. So that's just three.
If we stopped there, it would be a prolific amount of work.
But then she keeps going on because she's worked more than 2 decades in this sector, and she's done all the things that many of us that are listening right now have done in terms of corporate and foundation grants. She's done the government granting thing. And the thing that I am so curious to get into later on in our discussion is that she leads this incredible performing arts or organization and movement. And we're going to talk a little bit about All the World's a Stage and how she is able to very creatively marry performance art with fundraising. I don't know what the visual is in your head at home right now, but I've got about 100. So cool. We're excited. So yeah, Yolanda, there's so much to talk about up front, but I think we would love to start out and just talk a little bit about you and give us your background and how an Oklahoman landed in New York.
Well, I'm actually a Nebraskan with lots of Oklahoma roots, and so
lots of Midwest love. Yeah.
Yes. My family is originally from Oklahoma, and so I went to undergraduate there and went to Ohio for graduate school, came back down to Tulsa, started a music conservatory, did lots of different things there. And then one day decided to either sell or pack all of my worldly goods into a minivan. And my friend who's still there in Enid, Stacy, shout out to you.
Hey. Hi, Stacy.
Second Enid shout out amazingly on this show.
Yeah. We hopped in that minivan and we drove cross country and we came to the big city. She headed back to Oklahoma. She was just coming along for the
one-way
ride,
trip.
But for me, it was a one-way trip, and I've been in the New York City area ever since, moving things along. I've always had a passion for both music and performing arts and for fundraising and bringing people together to celebrate the causes that are important to us. And so, both a performer and fundraiser and philanthropist. And I'm very blessed and fortunate to have crafted a life, I say, of bringing all of those things together to do good, as you guys would say.
Thank you. Trademark. We are for good 2020.
I need like a sound effect when you say the word good.
Yes.
Need a t-shirt.
Well, can we dive in? I would love to hear you kind of unpack for us what the performing arts experiences have been in your life and how you're translating that into fundraising. I think it's so interesting to our audience that, is fundraising in the traditional sense. And we always look at the same kind of best practices and things like that. And I never see this come up. So I think it's fascinating. I think it's really unique to your approach.
Well, thank you. I developed something called All the World's a Stage. And what it is I realized that I was at this distinct advantage walking into the private dining room at whatever bank about to ask someone for millions and millions of dollars, that I was getting into character. I was breathing. I was doing all of the different things that I would be doing on stage. I actually would prepare myself with a costume, which would be, whatever I was wearing that day to convey whatever I needed to convey to that desired end result. And I knew how to pivot because of being in character. And so I said, there's something to this. Even if I was just not letting people see me sweat, I had the confidence factor there, and so I just said, maybe I should share this with people. And so All the World's a Stage was born, and then All the World's a Virtual Stage was born after that as well for the great pivot of 2020.
Speaking of pivoting, yeah.
You hit on something that's so intuitive to fundraising. I mean, there is not a gift officer in history that hasn't, taken a deep breath before you walk in to ask for that big gift. And I don't care how confident you are. I don't care how much the donor knows you're coming in for the right amount at the right time with the right project. There is some nerves that come into play there. And I wonder what you do. Do you channel those nerves in a way?
Well, the real core pillar of All the World's a Stage is preparation, because that's not something that you can make up. So there's a certain level of confidence that gets past those nerves. Really, it happened because years and years ago, I was backstage about to do a big performance. I've been very blessed to have performed on some major stages and over in Europe. And I was like, Lord, I know that I didn't practice and I didn't pay any attention to any of this ever. But if you'll just perform a miracle right now and let me go on stage and do a perfect job, I'll never do it again. And so I said, oh my God, that was stressful. And that was like PTSD for me as a fundraiser, as a person in general. Just let me always honor whatever it is that I'm doing by being as prepared as possible as I can for it. So then that confidence comes because I know that I'm ready. And then I can do all the pivoting and such from there. So it starts with being prepared, and then the rest goes from there.
Awesome. I love that.
I love it.
So many commonalities between what we do and how we prepare for it, because you're right. I mean, that's probably true in any way in life, preparing for a test or preparing to move or something. So that's great advice. I think I'm very curious about WOC, and if you're like me and you're a Hick, Oklahoma, and you mispronounced it and called it WOC because it's WOC, Women of Color in Fundraising and Philanthropy. And this is a very fledgling organization, and we're so curious about it. Tell us what it is and why you created this.
Well, I'm the first Black president of Women in Development New York, and it's 40-year history, and we just celebrated the 40th anniversary of that stalwart organization.
Applause hands.
Mm-hmm. In fundraising, it's the New York City chapter of that organization, but it really is a powerful force for women in the field and has been since, I talked to some of the founding mothers about, they don't realize the history that they're living and have lived. They'll have a conversation in front of me like, what year was it that we finally were taken seriously as fundraisers? And somebody else will say 1986. And then this would happen because this happened, and these are some powerhouse women. And so I am honored to have that that place, in the sector. And then, realizing that diversity milestone a couple of years ago, we embarked upon a diversity and inclusion task force for WID, and really dug deep to see what was going on, because this pivotal moment for me in my life and my fundraising and philanthropic life was when my presidency was announced. I started getting this outpouring of just all kinds of messages from women of color in the field. Now, we weren't sure if it was just a pipeline issue or if they were there and didn't come to things because we'd had a certain perception about it. And it was that they weren't coming and they were there. And I had been in tears a couple of times because I got a message, more than once, I finally see someone that looks like me at the helm. And so now I feel like there's a place for me here, and I'm going to come around a little more. So the room has certainly changed. I'm not taking credit for it. It took a lot of people, on board to do that, but I'm honored to have been along for that ride. Now, that just culminated, and I wrote an article called DEI from the Inside Out for the Chronicle of Philanthropy, where I'm on the advisory committee for the Chronicle. And I learned a lot from that 2-year experience. And one of the things I learned is a strange epiphany to have as a human being, that you cannot control the future. So sometimes I think we don't realize that
Aristotle Johnson, yes.
Aristotle F. Johnson.
F. Johnson,
yes.
Oh,
I like him, yes. Okay. Gotta get the F. But so I just started to realize that no matter what happens, like, change takes time. And so while I continue that work with LID, you know, I've transitioned the task force to a committee that's going to continue to move that work forward. But I said, you know, I really feel like there needs to be a space for the unique experience of being a woman of color in a profession. And so I felt the more outpouring that I received, I just knew it was the right thing to do. I've been talking to people for a long time. I started doing career roundtables, you know, this spring. And then I said, the time is now, let's just do it. So it was already about to happen. And then this most current racial equity movement happened as well. And I think that probably carried a bit of momentum with it. But yeah, we're a couple of months old and we're already over 600 members across the country and internationally. Wow. And it's been a really wonderful time. We have so much to offer. We have so much that we have planned that it's just exciting.
Well, and it seems so validating too, because you're wondering, is this something that people are wanting? Is this a space they want to come into to have these conversations? And I mean, that's a testament not only to the fact that people were looking for this community, but also a testament to your marketing that you were able to get the reach out there. And I think it's such an important conversation. And we were talking about this before we actually hit the record button, that you know, when we created this company, we wanted to not run away from these topics that are difficult to talk about in fundraising, because as people in the development sector and the nonprofit sector, I mean, you are hardwired to be neutral in all things. I mean, we don't share with our donors how, you know, our political feelings, you know, how we feel on race issues, how we feel on gender issues. And in some way, John and I were saying that leads to this level of unauthenticity, and we're not being our true selves. And it also doesn't provide a forum for someone to raise their hand and say, hey, the way that we're operating hurts me and divides me. Can we talk about that? So I am so appreciative that you brought this up, and I commend this new initiative, because I just think that we need to be students, lifelong students that are learning about how we can be helpful, how we can be ambassadors. So how could somebody connect with your organization and learn more about what WOC does and how they could be connected?
They can visit our website. It is www. Are you supposed to use that anymore? So
we'll put it in the show notes. Don't you worry.
You feel so inclined.
WOC-FP.com. So woc-fp.com. And you can find lots of different things there. One of the things I'm proudest of is our online resource library. That's something that came from my heart. I didn't even put it behind the member wall. It's just out there for people to use it, because I said we need to have a place where all of this information lives. And so right away, people have been writing reports and preparing presentations using the resources in that library. So that's been a really touching and exciting thing too.
Did you hear that, everybody? Free resources, free online resource library, WOC-FP.com. We will put it in the show notes. We all love a good free testimonial, a tutorial, a template, whatever it is. So thank you for sharing that resource with our listeners.
Well, one of the resources, Yolanda, we had the chance to check out a few of them, and I, again, second that it's a great place to dive in and start in the learning process if you're just starting too. But this quote popped out at me that I thought was really interesting, that said, it's incredibly important to have diversity in this field to change giving trends and cultivate abundance. And you know, there's been a lot of moments over the last few months to just be like growing up as a 35-year-old white kid in Oklahoma, of just having a pivot to just say, wow, like a wake up moment to say, I've not looked at this from other people's perspectives, and I've not stepped out of my own skin, you know, in a lot of ways. And this is one of those little moments that I read that and I thought, how do we impact change in our philanthropies is if we don't have the voices, if we don't have the fundraisers on the front lines talking to donors about what's important from their perspective and their worldview, we're missing so many of these important causes being elevated to the surface. And I think it struck home that this speaks to the systemic issue that we could really all help lean in and try to fix collectively by, you know, going forward in this path. So I'd love if you want to talk a little bit about that, and just maybe even some action steps of how can a nonprofit today, start moving toward a path of more inclusion and more diversity on the front lines, just so we can have a better perspective and funding of priorities?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that there are several different things that can happen, but to prioritize them, I'd say the top thing is seeing things through the DEI lens. Now, DEI is the common acronym, and there's a reason for that, but there's some sensitivities around that as well. So even with WID, this committee that came out of the Diversity and Inclusion Task Force is actually the Inclusion, Equity, and Diversity Committee, because we decided to prioritize inclusion, because inclusion means the antithesis of tokenism. It means that you have changed your perspective so much that this is the norm, that these are no longer difficult conversations to have in the sector, that, that everybody has a place and they feel included and not tokenized, and not that a box has been checked. So I think to really make that kind of change has to come from the inside out. The same things that I mentioned in the article. What I learned is that we have to take actionable and measurable steps, things that are realistic. Change takes time. And for it to be systemic, it really has to become the norm. So things like core values of an organization, things like your mission and vision, revisiting that. What does your leadership look like? And does it reflect your constituency? That's a big one.
That's a huge
because
one.
Then you have to get away from the white savior complex and issues like that, So the actionable steps, making a plan, getting people on board. The stakeholders have to be on board. You're not going to get very far if they aren't, and they have to understand that this is something that isn't just for this season and for this news cycle, that it's something that really needs to take place. And I love what you said in that quote about abundance, because that is where abundance springs forth, is when we have all these different perspectives, and when those with the privilege are willing to give it up a bit to make those seats at the table, either on a board of directors, either, with the staff. I once worked at an organization where, I was one of the only people of color. I was the only person of color, fundraising executive there. Yet all of the constituents, literally all were children of color. And I didn't realize this at first, they needed to see me in there, because Absolutely. They actually didn't even think that, that now we're getting way deep and we don't have enough time for that. But it's like, do certain groups of people of color even see it as a viable profession? Fundraising started getting its respect in the 80s and 90s as a true profession. And now, we've already arrived there. And now all of the other layers of work needs to be done as well for women and for people of color. So just thinking of inclusion first and foremost, that you want people there and that you really want to make the change, and you want to make it in measurable steps and actionable steps.
That's great advice. And I've never been punched in the stomach before. I don't know what that feels like, but I would equate that sensation to hearing you say phrases like, women are coming up to you and saying, oh, we haven't had any wins like this in fundraising since 1986. I feel a punch in my gut when I hear things like that are of our lifetime, of this generation. And I'm just curious, like, how you would define how women of color feel in the development world, and how can we be helpful to lift them up?
Voices need to be heard. The inclusion aspect needs to be there. It runs the gamut. I can't speak for everyone, but what I would say, for myself personally, and from what I've seen and heard from our members and community, is just, feeling like the norm, not feeling otherized, knowing that you have a place there because you're a qualified individual, not necessarily, again, having to code switch or being there because somebody needed to check a box, just really feeling included in the community and having voices heard from strategy and, leadership, having the opportunities to give that different perspective, I think, are very important. And then there's a whole other aspect to it. Last week on the 13th of August was Black Women's Equal Pay Day. And if you look through, WOC is going to be drawing attention to all the different type of women's equal pay day. I believe it's March 31st for women in general. Asian women's equal pay day is February. Native women's is October 1st. Latina pay day is coming up as well. And so this just goes to show where women are, compared to the dollar for a white male. So, Black women right now are at 62 cents. That shouldn't be the case either, because as people and, in the profession, we need to be valued as well and respected that way, to make sure that we have the benefits packages and we have things in place that you'll be able to make this a real career and survive and thrive. One of the strangest things about being in development, I once worked at a place where we had some very high level donors, even globally. And so it was always so funny, because you're in the room with these people that are wearing like $10,000 dresses. And I would love when they'd say, "Who are you wearing?" And I'd be like, haha, it's from
Pretty in Pink.
this little place. Yeah.
So did in my back room. Yeah.
The power dynamic and just the whole like socioeconomic dynamic, how it's off, how you're interacting with these people. So, we just need to even the playing ground as far as salaries are concerned, as far as, the positions are concerned, diversifying those teams and making everybody feel that they belong there, because they do,
Absolutely. I wish the one downside of having a podcast is that the end user cannot see that John and I have just been nodding for probably 20 minutes straight right now. Yes. I mean, what you're saying has such validity, and it really does make you kind of stop and think about your role in all of this, whether it's intentional or not. And, I read something the other day about, feel like, what can we do with our discomfort? We could be angry, we could rage against it, defying what we perceive to be hurtled at us, or we could lean into it. We could use it to ask questions and say, why does this unsettle me? So, because I am deeply unsettled as a person of the human race, by what's going on in our country, but I definitely think it's a positive thing to keep pushing that envelope and to keep asking those questions. And I want to be a student of the world. I want my children to be asking these questions, because we all have a part to play in this. And I don't want to be standing on the wrong side of history, when this plays out. I want to be on the side of humanity. And so, I mean, the thing, John's like so terrified probably what I'm going to say, but I mean, the thing that I just can't reconcile right now is, how did humanity get politicized? I just think leaning into kindness, goodness, and doing the right thing is at the heart of all of these issues. So I very much appreciate what you just said right there, Yolanda.
I love it.
Thank you. You should join my allies group.
Done. We're in. Adding that into show notes.
Tell us about the allies group. I know, I think we said this right before the podcast started, but I mean, Yolanda is 10 weeks into launching WOC. She already has 600 members. For those of you folks running memberships out there, that's an incredible feat, and speaks to just the character that Yolanda brings and the passion for this space. But you've also mentioned it's allies. 100
Allies
members.
in Action.
Allies in Action is 100 members already, and it's just a few weeks old. So please tell us about these things.
So Allies in Action membership network started because I have been very fortunate to, I love to curate and moderate panels and different discussions on different topics. And as this current racial equity movement was really gaining its momentum, there were a lot of conversations to be had. I started receiving emails and phone calls from people, from white friends and non-people of color. What do I do was literally the question they were asking, is what do I do right now? This is crazy. I need to do something. I mean, I'm sorting through nonprofits with one friend of where she can go and who she can talk to, and like mapping out a game plan for her. And, the reaction to that has been very interesting. Every reaction by African Americans is valid, or by Black people in general is valid, but some are over it. They're like, this is not new. We've seen this around for a long time, so stop acting so surprised by it. And, some are hurt and others are just, defiant. And then, some people are willing to help. I find myself in that group, probably because there's so much at stake at this particular moment in time in our country. I said, but I need it to state, so if you go to the Allies page, Allies in Action lives on the YFJ Consulting website, which is YFJ consulting.com. We love hyphens, don't we?
You can just add so many things on when you hyphen.
Go to the show notes. We're going to just list this stuff out for you.
Yes, that's
great.
it.
Okay. So it begins with, it is not a Black person's responsibility to teach white people about racism.
Yep.
I needed to just declare that because that is the truth. However, if you're willing to do better, I'm here for that right now. Mm-hmm. I feel so restless that there's work to be done, and that we might just be on the cusp of real change, that I said, let's do it. Let's do the work. I'll design it together with you. There's someone who was part of the Obama administration, who's an advisor on Allies in Action, who has helped me and some other colleagues put together a program that's based upon 4 pillars: education, legislation, inclusion, and action. And education, we're custom designing an anti-racism seminar with Aspen Leadership Group, and that's happening, next week.
Don't be scared. It's like us looking at our calendars.
Whoa. And then legislation, everybody's taking a pledge to vote in their local, state, and national elections, and educate themselves on how to vote and how to advocate and how to find those benchmarks for racial equity. Inclusion is assessment of our surroundings, personal, private, and professional. And then action is 2-pronged. When you get into this anti-racism work, it can cut kind of deep. So something that you recognize about yourself that you want to change, you can share it with others or not. And then there's a philanthropic component. YFJ Consulting, I provide philanthropic counsel, so I'll be providing that for the Allies. Everybody's going to make a gift of whatever size is meaningful to them toward racial equity or women and girls of color at year-end 2020. And so those are the 4 pillars of the work that we're going to be doing, and we're super excited. It launched with an event called a Global Gathering, where I had some incredible people, had a rep from Canada, from England, the Netherlands, who's based here in New York at the Center Jost Foundation. So it's exciting work.
When does Yolanda sleep?
I don't know if Yolanda sleeps.
I'm very efficient.
Yeah. Clearly.
I have great people around me. I have a great team.
One of the cornerstones, you talk about pillars of your company, of ours, is storytelling, and the ability for storytelling to go into very human and vulnerable places and connect us like nothing else. And so, I wonder if there's a moment that sticks out to you, particularly like a defining moment or story in your career that has been kind of defining for you as you've worked in development.
I think I would go back to the outpouring of letters that I received. The woman who said, I finally see someone who looks like me. It was life-changing. I said, okay, I should not be receiving this letter in 2019. And yet I am, so I accept that, but I don't accept that as the norm, not any longer. We've got to do this work to transform lives and therefore transform the sector, and make things more inclusive. I don't think that there probably is anything more powerful that can be said to somebody, and then it catches you off guard. It was just like, oh, okay, because we're living our lives, you have a busy schedule, you're doing whatever, sometimes, and then, there was a young woman, the WOC launch event had an amazing panel with Ana Oliveira from the New York Women's Foundation, had Fatima Shama from the Fresh Air Fund, Catherine Griscom, and, just some amazing other women as well, Allison Reeves from CCS. It was an amazing panel. And Jeannie Sager, since I'm listening to everybody, I better make sure I don't leave anybody out. Jeannie Sager was the director of the new director of the Women's Philanthropy Institute at Indiana University. We have a very close relationship with IU. And that conversation, you never realize how it's impacting somebody. And then suddenly on LinkedIn, there's a young woman who was like, thanks to all of you, because now I'm going to keep writing my book.
Oh my
I had
goodness.
imposter syndrome as a young woman of color, and I didn't think, we have to redefine what it means to be a philanthropist as well, because everything is set upon this, archetype of the white affluent male. And so for people just to understand that whatever you're doing, you are doing this good work. You are a philanthropist. You could be a fundraiser who's also a philanthropist. A lot of us don't give ourselves that credit. So when she said that, it was just like, wow. So she's continuing to write her book. She keeps updating everybody, but it was that conversation, like listening in on that panel. And so then I just said, sometimes you just get validation for the work that you're doing, and it just feels really good to keep moving the needle. So.
And those little surprises are just like the gifts that we get. I mean, you could have had that validation or confirmation from the Today Show, but I mean, having that sort of very genuine conversation with someone very vulnerable on LinkedIn has just got to be one of those great moments, in your career.
It meant a lot, and that's what this is for. The other day, someone else sent a message again on LinkedIn and said, I finally, got a foot in the door with my CEO. I get to be a part of this high level, intimate meeting, saying, advocating for more DEI initiatives at this particular organization. And she was like, I need help. I want to make sure I put my best foot forward. So we had a networking event, and she wrote to a few of the other people in that group. My schedule didn't allow me to be there, but I did review her documents before she went into the meeting. And that's exactly what this is for. They all came together and workshopped that whole concept for her to be prepared for that, because it's the community that we want to build to be there for each other, which is really important.
I love that. And it speaks to that it's not just one person's work. It's going to take everybody pulling.
Mm-hmm.
And you are such a light and an inspiration. I can just see that in your storytelling and your kind of explanation of everything that's going on. We love to ask all of our guests the same question, Yolanda, and one of those is, what's your one good thing? And that, how we define that is, you got to watch her on YouTube to get that reaction. But the heart of this is, each of us are running our own race and our own nonprofit or consulting or wherever our path philanthropist that we're listening today. What's something that you would say has worked for you that you can change or implement today that really has led to this abundance that you're seeing in your own career? Obviously, there's a lot of work still to be done, but what's something that we can do today?
Well, my answer is two-pronged.
That would be two good things, Yolanda.
I'm
just kidding.
Stop, Jonna, or I'm going to ask her to give us 3.
Okay. I'm kidding. Two good things.
I would be remiss if I was not overt about the fact that I'm a person of faith. And so that is a major part of my life and my work. And so I have to give credit where it's due. But I would also say that strategy, be strategic in everything you do. Life is short. And so while you're enjoying it and while you're staying in the present, think about the desired end result and what you really want to be doing to fulfill that purpose or your purpose, and try to lead a life and do your work in a way that connects dots. I love to talk about illumination, because I think that in fundraising and philanthropy, we are the lights illuminating the path for the good work to be done. And so, so those are my two good things.
I love those two good
things. Those are fantastic. And we talked about that illumination piece, and I think that was actually tied into your Chronicle article, wasn't it? I mean, the quote that I wrote down.
A lot.
It's so great, though. I mean, in just a sound bite, I mean, I thought you had a very profound statement, which is, we cannot force this on people. All we can do is just illuminate the path. And it's like, we're just making sort of an invitation, which is what we do all the time in development. We extend an invitation for someone to come be a part of our mission, to be a part of our community, to be a part of the miracles that we're trying to advance. And this topic is truly no different. This is not a stretch for any of us. And it's like, it's a choice again. Do we want to rage against it, or can we lean into it? And you know what? We want to be for good. Yolanda, you are clearly for good. And I just really appreciate you bringing like such a wonderful message of hope to our listeners today.
I love it. So Yolanda, how can our listeners, our good community, connect with you? I know you're all over the socials, and just tell us, where's the best place? Where do you like to hang out online?
you can reach me on LinkedIn.
LinkedIn.
Yeah, I mean, I'm everywhere, but honestly, I have people that are actually everywhere, so it may not be me exactly sometimes with that. But on LinkedIn, it's really me. So, yeah, you can connect with me there.
And if you head on over to our show notes following the conclusion of this broadcast, then we will also have a list of all of these links and to the websites, to resources, and we can grab any more links that we have personally to Yolanda. So thank you so much for joining our good community today. It's been a gift. Thank you.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Yolanda.
you.